Hello, welcome to episode 153 of the Book Binge, where this week we are reviewing Book 5 of The Wheel of Time, The Fires of Heaven. Now, if you've been following along with my Wheel of Time diaries, you'll know that I actually really loved this book, and I think it absolutely slaps. So, let's not beat around the bush with this one and just jump right into the good of the book in this review, and in, dare I say, the great of this review. There was a great many things that I really enjoyed about the Fires of Heaven. Let's start talking about them right now. The very first thing, and of course I should probably preface this before I get into it, this is going to have like some very minor spoilery content. For the most part, this will be spoiler free, but I will be mentioning some names of certain things at various different points. And like, if you're very, very spoiler sensitive, like, I don't know why you would be watching this review in the first place, but just know that you might not be safe if you don't like for me to even mention names. With that out of the way, the very first thing that is fantastic about the Fires of Heaven is Rand as a character. He absolutely shines here and grows so much, where I've heard that his character grows even as early as like the Shadow Rising. I didn't really feel like that happened as much as I wanted it to. This is where a lot of that actual growth in his character work comes to fruition. Seeing his influence and his power grow naturally over the course of the story and over the course of a couple of hurdles that he has to jump over, we shall say, figuratively speaking, it's super satisfying. That power and influence over nations and over peoples, it's really fantastic. One of the absolute shining points of this book. And that's in the one major storyline. And the other major storyline that does happen in this book, Tel'aran'rhiod, is the major shining point. Lots of stuff happens in the world of dreams in the Fires of Heaven, and most of it was pretty cool, and a lot of it was really awesome. A lot of great revelations that occur throughout the book, a lot of great confrontations that occur in this book, and a lot of moments of, oh wow, I didn't see that coming, that happen in both storylines, but especially through the usage of Tel'aran'rhiod and those plot lines. It's really great. Speaking of the two different major storylines, I will say that for the first half of the book especially, the general plot balance is very good between the girls' plotline and Rand's plotline, and also the miscellaneous plot lines that take a single chapter here and there mixed in are all really great. The balancing of it and all of those plot lines are really good. Even though in the back half, I think those miscellaneous plot lines kind of like drop off a little bit, don't appear as much as I wish they would have. For the most part, the general plot balancing is surprisingly good, especially as you come up to the climax with the two primary storylines. Speaking of the various storylines, I've already talked about how Rand's plotline and the girls' plotline is shown, especially where Rand's character development was concerned and where Tel'aran'rhiod's stuff was concerned. But I want to say the miscellaneous plotlines that were here were very great as well. One of them continues directly from the primary miscellaneous plotline that occurs throughout the Shadow Rising, that being the one with Swan Sanche, Leanne, and Min. So seeing that develop and further a little bit in this book was great and comes to a good head. There was a couple other miscellaneous plot lines that I'm not going to spoil and talk about here, but chapter 19 especially, one of my favorites of the series so far. It was really great, and that was one of the miscellaneous plot lines. Also one of the longest chapters in the book. It was really good. So a lot of this other stuff that isn't just the main plot line was also material that I really enjoyed from the Fires of Heaven. But I think the thing that definitely shines out the most is the showdowns, the climaxes, the resolutions. All of these are really great between the various storylines. The book really actually takes you to where it's trying to get you to, whereas I feel like the Shadow Rising like kind of gets you to a point, but like also stops in the middle of something. As far as the girls' plotline in Tanchico, that came to a good head in Shadow Rising, but like it was also left, you know, kind of open up in the air after Nynaeve defeated Moghedien. And then you have other stuff with the Black Aja occurring there that, you know, kind of leaves you wanting a little bit more, curious about what happens next. It did stop in a good spot, but not exactly in like my favorite spot in the entire world, we shall say. The Rand plot line, I famously didn't love the way that climax occurred in the Shadow Rising and thought that it was really lacking as far as things go, and especially where other characters like Egwene and Matt were concerned, they didn't really have much to do in like the whole second half of The Shadow Rising, it seemed like they just were off page for a lot of time because it was focusing on Rand, and even that still didn't come to a head that I personally found super satisfying. Comparatively, this one continues that storyline brilliantly and goes through a couple different major events that are actually really important, not just for Rand's character, but also, say, for Matt's character, has a couple big moments in this book that are really great. And the climactic sequence with the Aiel only had one disappointing aspect to it, but all of that was really epic. The revelations between the two major plot lines that actually lead to a joint climax between the two of them was a really special moment for me. Even better probably than the Dragon Reborn's climax, and that's pretty high praise because that was one of my favorite things about the book. It was one of the things that made me love the Dragon Reborn so much. So the fact that this one definitely landed at that level as far as the climax was concerned was really satisfying. A general characterization was broadly a good thing in the Fires of Heaven as well. Get more into characters' heads as they evolve a little bit. Rand and Matt are definitely the most standout as far as this is concerned, but you also get a decent bit from Nynaeve, and all of this was really good. For some, this was a little annoying. Many claim that Nynaeve is at her worst in this book, and I totally understand the complaints as far as that is concerned, even though I didn't take particular issue to it, but for the most part, the general characterization was really good. For others, the expansions and hints for the future is just really, really phenomenal. Also, one other point that I do want to bring up on the topic of the climaxes and how the plot balancing is concerned, I will say the balance of power within the book is also really great. The magic is super, super good. The magic is one of these things that I've been interested in learning a little bit more about here and there, and we've gotten things, a little bit more clarification as far as how magic works, not just with side in, but also side R. Both sides, the male and the female, have it works really great, and the balance of how Robert Jordan has made this world feel as far as magic is concerned is actually really great. One of the things that I realized in the ultimate climax of this book is that there are artifacts that enhance and also hinder magic in ways that make the balance of power within the world super believable. There's less Deus Ex Machina involved in how characters are able to do certain things with certain characters because you have artifacts to influence how those things work. Using those tools and allowing for them to turn the tables is really, really cool, and I got a lot of satisfaction from that at multiple points in this book, most especially in the climax. But yeah, that's something else that I wanted to point out. But there is a little bit of the bad that I do want to talk about with the Fires of Heaven. What some consider to be a weird, albeit minor, romance of sorts is something that certain people have complained about with the Fires of Heaven, but I've also viewed it a little bit more as like a natural Oedipus complex of sorts. It is still a weird thing, I will agree, but it's also not the strangest thing that has even happened in the series so far, so people making a big stink about that within this book catches me a little bit off guard, but there is a very minor point that certain people complain about. Most everything else that is bad about the book, however, is actually not what's on the page and is more what is on the page. There's one specific climactic duel, which I did mentioned very briefly and very non-spoiler like before, which would have actually really aided in a specific participant's character development a ton if it was on the page, but for some reason it's just not on the page, and it's really strange. If you read the book, I don't think there's a particular reason why it was off the page. If one of the primary participants of that duel was a different character, I think it actually would have been perfectly fine, and if done properly would have been better left off the page. But because it was a different character participant, it just didn't make sense to leave off the page, so that left me a little bit disappointed, I confess. I would have loved a little bit more of the plot line that happens in chapter 19, which I mentioned before. A little bit more of that would have been absolutely great in the second half. More of the Swan Min Lian plot as well in the second half would have been cool. So like I said, most of the things that I personally would complain about were things that weren't even in the book, which we'll also talk about in just a minute. As for the ugly circus plotline in this book, which is so infamous and so reportedly bad, is actually not that bad. Most of the stuff that takes place during the circus plotline is actually Tel'aran'rhiod material, so complaining about the circus plotline, I don't personally get a whole lot of. like I mentioned before, people say that Nynaeve is at her worst in this book. I wasn't too bothered by her, strangely enough, despite the fact that I really disliked her in the first book. Elaine and another woman are a little bit more annoying in this book as well, and I suppose I could see people like really complaining about that, but they like irked me a tiny bit, but that was the extent of how it affected me. And then there's also the obvious fact that I have failed to include up to this point. Perrin's plot is just not here. It's just not here. And like, I personally didn't really care about this because it meant no Zareen in this book and better pacing as far as the other plot lines were concerned. So like, I'm not complaining explicitly, but it is definitely a little bit weird for Perrin's plotline to just not be here. Admittedly, his plotline in The Shadow Rising is really good, and that actually came to a fantastic climactic moment there that if there was any plotline that could have been stopped right where it was and not appear in the next book, that plotline not appearing here after that actually makes sense. Like, it totally makes sense. I'm not going to say like it's an objective problem with the book, but it is definitely probably going to cause it's not going to cause some upheaval, but it is going to confuse some people for sure. As for the recommendation, well, like I said in the last review, it's kind of hard to recommend, a book that is multiple books into a series when if you're watching the review, you've probably either already read the series or you're as far as I am anyway. But if you read on to book 4 after reading that first trilogy of sorts, yes, absolutely continue on to The Fires of Heaven. Obviously, if you loved The Shadow Rising, you might not like this book as much as me, because I liked this book a heck of a lot more than The Shadow Rising, and that kind of tends to be the thing. I think The Shadow Rising and Lord of Chaos are broadly more popular than The Fires of Heaven is. But yeah, I still do recommend continuing on to this if you happen to read on to book 4 and enjoyed it. Even if it was your least favorite in the series, I actually recommend that you continue on to The Fires of Heaven and see if that works better for you, like it did for me, because this one reminded me why I really love The Wheel of Time, whereas The Shadow Rising was just like, yeah, this is more Wheel of Time, I like it, that's that. This book is definitely top 2 for me, alongside The Dragon Reborn. I think for right now, I'm going to keep The Dragon Reborn on top for these first 5 books because I don't remember anything that I actively disliked about that book besides having a little bit of minor apprehension about Zareen. If someone were to go back and rewatch my diaries for The Dragon Reborn, maybe there was a couple things that I actually complained about besides Nynaeve tugging her braid about 50 million times, even more than in this book. But beyond like that very minor thing, I don't remember there being anything about that book that I disliked, whereas this one did have a couple things that like I would have liked to see more of, for example. So for that reason, right now I'm going to keep The Dragon Reborn on top, but the 2 of these books might as well be tied. So, that's just kind of how things go. But I will say, The Fires of Heaven has higher highs than The Dragon Reborn has, but it also has a couple things that I was left wanting from, so like I just said, the 2 of them might as well be tied at this point. And after finishing this book, I am suddenly reinvigorated to read on. Unfortunately, my schedule does not allow for that nearly so soon as I wanted. Both my reading schedule and my video schedule, and actually life, all of a sudden, come to think of it. I can adjust some of my reading schedule, maybe, and I'm actually going to try to, but we will definitely see how that will work. No guarantees that I will be able to make that happen. Otherwise, my next read will be New Spring here in a couple of months, and I'm really looking forward to that one for a couple of reasons, but then I'm really looking forward to Lord of Chaos later this year after enjoying this book so much. But thank you for watching this video all the way through if you did. I'll be back on Thursday with another top 5 video, this one a little bit different than normal, and you will definitely see when that video releases if you check it out, but I'll be back regardless in the next video.